Thank you for being here tonight and for giving up your Thursday evening to be with us for a little while. It really means a lot that you've been at least curious enough to come and hear us out a bit more. Arthur and I are two members of Cooperation the Whole, and that basically means that we're part of a ragtag group of people who've been thrown together because we have committed our lives to trying to change the world. And that sounds like that, well, that is a very big statement, but it's the truth. And as you get to know me, you'll know that I'm not in the habit of mincing my words. Before we get into it, we want to start with some participatory democracy, so that's obviously what we're all about. Please raise your hand if you trust politicians. Cool, thank you. Tentative. And raise your hand if you feel genuinely represented by people in Westminster, like your views, your opinions are well represented. No, okay. So in that instance at least, everybody in this room has a lot in common with the probably thousands of people we've been speaking to on the streets of Hull for the last year. Time and time and time again we hear the same thing. And what this evening is inviting you to do is to imagine what might happen, what might be possible if all those people got in a room together. So this talk tonight is going to be short, it's only going to be about 30 minutes, and then there'll be the rest of the time for questions and discussion between us. And the aim of it is to first, hopefully get us on the same page about where we're at in 2024, what is the context we're looking at and working in, how we personally got here, obviously what our plans are and our ideas are for the future. And ultimately we're here to recruit you. Some of you are already sort of part recruits, already recruited, but the aim of these talks explicitly is to bring more people with us, because it's not going to work unless we have loads and loads of people across this city joining this movement. So I'm hoping that at least by the end of this talk you'll be curious enough to take it further, to come to an assembly if you haven't been to one already, and to find your place. So this talk is called The Revolution Starts in Hull. If you know your history, you'll know that is probably not the first time that statement has been uttered in this city. But unlike our predecessors, our mission is not to behead King Charles or to overthrow him. We could talk about that another time if you want. We're here to organise for something much bigger, much bigger. We're looking at 4 huge systems that we want to change. This is the way we conceptualise the interconnected systems of our world. So we want to organise to create a healthy planet, an economy that actually works for everybody, real local democracy, and strong connected communities. And these things are huge and all interconnected, and they all relate to each other. And so we think that we have to not make the mistake that other groups and other movements have made, which is to look at one specific issue. We have to do this really scary thing and look at everything all at once. And it is our underlying belief that we can change the world. And that's not arrogance, it's just the knowledge that we built these systems, human beings made these systems. That means that we can rebuild them and we can change them to create the world that we want. So, the context where we're at in 2024. It's probably already fairly painfully obvious to everybody in this room, but I'm just going to take a few minutes to remind us so that we're all starting from the same place, hopefully. So last year, the UN Secretary General, pretty conservative establishment guy, not a radical, he said that humanity has opened the gates of hell and that we are heading towards a dangerous and unstable world. Those are his words. So extreme weather events like droughts, floods, storms will have and are already having direct impacts on what food we can grow. So crop failures are already beginning to happen around the world, and they're going to happen more and more in the next few years, certainly in the next decade or so. We're definitely not prepared for that. That is just a fact, especially in this country because we import most of our food. So next year, because of the crazy weather we've seen last winter and this summer already, we will see shortages on the shelves in Tesco, which we're not prepared for. We're also not prepared for the massive movement of peoples around the world. So 1.2 billion people are expected to be forced from their homes and on the move by 2050. Climate refugees, because the place where they live is unlivable for human beings. So what is clear to us is that the climate crisis is not unfolding in isolation. When we look at it clearly, when we're not distracting ourselves or denying it, which we all do, myself included, all the time, because we have to, because it's so huge. But when we look at it clearly, we can see that actually we're in a phase of collapse. And the climate is just one of those things. So we are also experiencing the collapse of our economy, where resources and money is funneled into increasingly fewer and fewer hands, where people are forced to live on the streets and use food banks in the 6th largest economy in the world. That's not an economy that is functioning, it's one that is in collapse. Also the collapse of our vital services, like the NHS, the education system, we're all experiencing this right now. And of course, what we see as more or less the root of all this, the collapse and failure of our political system, where it seems like our so-called leaders care more about scoring points against each other, winning votes by any means necessary, advancing their own personal careers, more so than they do about making positive change for us and confronting these crises that we're living through head on. This is a kind of overmade point by now, probably, but we currently have a Prime Minister who is a former hedge fund manager who actually made £100 million in profit from the 2008 financial crash that ruined lives around the world. And we're living through a cost of living crisis under his watch. That is not a political system that makes sense. That's the end of the doom and gloom, and I'm putting it in really brief terms because what we're here to talk about is what we can actually do about it. And it starts by looking at it honestly and acknowledging that the system has failed. We know it has, we're experiencing it right now. And if we keep going with it, pretending like it hasn't failed, we know what will happen. We can see it. Fascism is also on the rise all around the world. We can see that. If we don't provide some answers, some way forward, then they will. And they are. So all this that I've been talking about puts us in a moment of crisis. And obviously I've just scratched the surface. But there's something interesting about this word crisis, which everyone is really bored of hearing me say now, including myself, but it's still worth saying, which is that the Greek root of the word crisis means the turning point in a really long illness where the patient either recovers or dies. It means a crossroads, a crisis. So we are at a crisis now, but that also means we're at a crossroads, and there is massive potential if we're willing to rise to the challenge. So, before I pass on to Arthur, this is the bit where I say about how I got here, personally. And I think it's important to add a little bit of that in because we're all different people and we're all human beings, and we all come to this from different places. The things that motivate you to do this work, hopefully, may not be the same things that motivate me. But what I would say is that we are all on a journey of some sort in acknowledging this crisis and coming to terms with it and in doing something about it. And yours may take a turn on the crossroads with us if you let it. So I wasn't always doing this. This is not my natural space to be sitting up here talking to you. I was living a very normal life up until about 2018. I was a receptionist living in Norwich with my then boyfriend, keeping my head down, wasn't interested in politics or the environment or anything like that. And then in 2018, two things happened in very quick succession. I read on my way to work the headlines about the 2018 IPCC report. IPCC stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they release these reports every year or every so often to tell us how fucked we are, basically. And the 2018 one was a really, really bad one. Like the scientists were like, nobody's listening, like, you have to listen to us now. And the headline was 12 years left to save humanity. And that is the world's leading scientists, the most intelligent people that we really have on this planet, the human species, saying 12 years left to save humanity. pretty shocking thing, obviously, to read. I'm sure billions of people around the world were shocked and not knowing what to do. That's part of it. And then just after that, I read another thing, which is about a group called Extinction Rebellion, who were going to be using something called civil disobedience, which I didn't know what that was, to force the UK government to do something, to respond to this science. I went down to London for one of their first big protests and to check it out, and that day changed my life forever. That was my turning point on the crossroads. It was shocking, and I was out of my depth, and I was stood at the back and saw people getting arrested, and it was crazy. But it was also incredibly inspiring and obviously life-changing to see people and be around people who were actually acting as if that headline meant something. Whilst governments were just and still are cowardly, just ignoring it, and the media is warping it and pretending it isn't happening, here were ordinary people acting like it meant something. And since then, since that day, I've experienced what I call magic many times, and that is the magic of thousands of strangers, ordinary people, coming together with a shared purpose, on the streets, whatever, relying on each other to make real change. Since then, I did loads of things I never thought I'd do. I've been arrested 10 times, and I'll briefly tell you about one of them, because it pertains to magic. So, myself, a couple of years ago now, myself and 8 other women carefully broke the windows of HSBC headquarters in Canary Wharf. We were charged with about £500,000 worth of criminal damage, which carries a fairly hefty prison sentence if convicted. But when we addressed a jury of our peers, we told them we did break the windows, no point denying that. That's not why we did it, to get away with it. But that we had a good reason, and they agreed with us. So after just 2 hours of deliberation, they delivered a unanimous not guilty verdict. That was magic. A jury is one of the last remaining truly democratic spaces we have in our society. It's a random selection of ordinary people from all walks of life, different life experiences, education, demographic, everything, who don't know what they're coming into when they turn up on the day. But over a course of time, they are trusted with all the information, not just pieces of information that are deemed relevant by politicians or business leaders or the media. They're given all the information, and they're trusted to make a decision together, democratically, based on their conscience. So over the course of 3 weeks, I addressed that jury, and I told them the truth. I told them that HSBC has invested over £80 billion in fossil fuels in the 5 years since we signed the Paris Agreement, which is a legally binding, supposedly, climate agreement. That they are destroying communities around the world and making this planet unlivable and making billions in profit in doing so. I told them that the court that we were living in, that we were in for the trial, was due to be underwater by 2030. I told them about Luca, my nephew, who's about 3, whose future I worry about all the time. I told them about Hull, this place that I've come to love, which is the second most vulnerable city to flooding after London, as you know. And I told them what I'm telling you, which is that I believe we all have a part to play in responding to these crises, these multiple crises. And your part may be different to mine. My part's brought me here to Hull, where it's now abundantly clear to me that the climate crisis is a symptom of a much bigger problem. And the root of that problem is who in our society gets to make decisions and why they're making those decisions. And that is why everything we do in Cooperation Hull is rooted in changing our democratic system to make it a real democracy, and we do that via People's Assemblies. With that, I'll start.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Gilly. I'm going to talk about People's Assemblies for a couple of minutes and what they are and why we think they're so important. But I just want to start with what's in it for you. We do want to to recruit you. We do want you to be part of Cooperation Hull, but why should you want to be part of Cooperation Hull? And I think everything that Gully has just said there explains it. You know, I'm sure you've all read the news, seen the headlines about the climate crisis, or the cost of living crisis, or the latest scandal in Westminster, whatever, and thought, yeah, that's shit, but what can I do? And by the end of the talk tonight, I think you're going to have an answer to that. So that's what's in it for you. So People's Assembly is ordinary people coming together and making decisions for ourselves, people like us in this room. So we turn up, share a meal, split up into small groups, ask ourselves a couple of really big questions and discuss. So it's very simple, but it's transformative, because it means sitting down with people who you disagree with, someone who reads a different paper or votes differently, has a different background and a different way of looking at the world. And then we're trying to reach a shared understanding and figure out how we're going to move forwards together. We don't always agree in those spaces, and that's all right, that's part of life. We don't always agree with everyone. But what we need is to practice moving through disagreement and conflict as allies and neighbours. With all of these crises that we're facing, we need all the practice in that we can get. So that's a People's Assembly, very basically. Where did the idea come from? We're not reinventing the wheel. There's success stories from all around the world of people using these tools. So the first one is Cooperation Jackson in Mississippi in the States. They've combined People's Assemblies with a network of workers' cooperatives, so businesses that are owned by the people who work there. And that's massively inspirational for us. They've had 2 mayors elected for the city, and they're really transforming the economy of Jackson. So inspirational, in fact, that we stole the name, as you might have noticed. We don't have loads of time here to go into detail about everything that they've done, but do look them up and see what they've achieved. It's really great. The second example is Barcelona. So in Barcelona, not so long ago, a group of pissed off citizens got together and started holding People's Assemblies all across the city to plan how they would take over the council. And they did that successfully. They got Barcelona's first ever female mayor elected. And that mayor was accountable to the decisions of the People's Assemblies. So that meant that the people were running the city. The third example takes us to the Middle East, Rojava in North Syria, where since a revolution in 2012, between 2 and 5 million people have been living under a system of local democracy, very similar to People's Assemblies, where all their needs are met by people working together. And I'll say that again, 2 to 5 million people. So that's Cooperation Jackson, Barcelona and Rojava. And they're all examples of how we can do things differently that are working right now across the world. It's examples of ordinary people moving beyond left and right and whatever else, people who are willing to disagree but then unite around a common purpose and organise in their own communities to get shit done.
Nice. So in a second, Arthur will talk about specifics, like what are the tools, how are we going to do this, and what we've already been doing as Cooperation Hull for the last year. But before that, just want to bring us back to like the bigger picture, the big vision. So obviously we talk a lot about People's Assemblies. That's our focus because we think we need the power to decide in order to affect anything else. But we do have a big vision, and it may sound utopian or naive or something, but it's the result of long periods of thoughtful research and thinking about what a strategy for the future needs to look like. And there's more we could go into, but the way that we sum it up is through these 4 circles that I mentioned earlier. So we need to move from divided societies. We all know that we're living in a divided world at the moment. In fact, we're always talking about it, and maybe that makes it worse. But along so many lines, we seem to be divided, and it's made worse because we don't have any physical spaces or opportunities left, really, in this country to gather and be and repair those divides. We can't do anything if we're alone, or if we're in factions or tribes or anything like that, if we allow ourselves to be divided by the ruling class or the media. So it's fundamental that we move, it's all about movement, that we move from divided societies to strong, caring communities. It's also fundamental that we move, as we've said, from this failing economy to an economy that works. The economy that works is called, in our language, the solidarity economy, and that is an economic system just like the one we have now in terms of what it provides all your material needs, but the priority for the solidarity economy is not profit, it's not lining the pockets of companies, but it's the well-being of people, communities and the planet. And the idea of a solidarity economy has been around for decades, we haven't made it up. The third thing is moving from a planet in crisis to a healthy earth. Lots of increasing amounts of people will disagree that there is a climate crisis or a man-made climate crisis or whatever, and we encounter that a lot. For me, that's not really the point. We all need air to breathe, water to drink, food to eat, and we need to do that by having a more healthy relationship to the natural world. And to do all of that, we need to move from this broken political system to true local democracy, because we need the power to decide, and we need the agency, so the ability to determine things for ourselves, not wait for permission or wait for somebody else to save us. So no matter what political mover, political agent you're looking at, if you're looking at Nigel Farage or Jeremy Corbyn, to be honest, all of them are still asking you to vote for them and trust them and let them fix it for you. For us, that's not how we're going to create real change up to the level that is needed now. So there are tools, abundant tools out there to make these movements in these four circles. And we'll just talk about a few of them, but there's loads of stuff in the solidarity economy already happening in Hull. Like this is already going on. And then the bottom are just more ideas out there, and there's a lot more of this on our website that we could talk about later. But just the point to make is that there is loads out there. We don't need to come up with the ideas. What we need is a movement of ordinary people who are willing to put them into practice, and that's what we're hoping to build. But for example, the word cooperation in Jackson's name and ours doesn't just refer to working together, it also refers to one of these tools, which is a cooperative. Maybe you already know, but I'll just quickly explain. A cooperative can be many things. So you can have a housing co-op where you don't pay rent to a landlord, but you collectively own the house together. Or you can have a workers co-op where the business is effectively owned by the staff, the people who work there, and you make decisions together. There's all different types of co-ops, but the point is democratically making decisions non-hierarchically from the ground up as opposed to from the top down. So that's a tool that needs to spread so that we can embed democracy in all parts of our lives. Is anyone in a co-op? Is anyone part of a co-op? You are. Cool. What, you mean this one?
The pub.
Ah, that's not a co-op, is it?
300 members.
I thought that was a community benefit society.
That's cool.
Is it? Well, me too then.
Oh, I am then, yeah.
Well, as of 2 months ago, lots of us are part of a co-op to buy the pub. But the point is, lots of people, majority of people aren't and probably don't even know what it is, so that's something that needs to change. Credit unions is another thing, taking our money out of the giant banks who don't give a fuck about us and are really vulnerable to global financial shocks and stuff and lose all our money. We can actually pool our money together, and we can do these things called savings clubs. There's all sorts of things we can do as a community, as a neighbourhood, in safe ways that aren't too scary, you know, because these are big changes. But they are real tools that we can begin to use. And time banking, there is a time bank in Hull, so that's where you exchange skills and expertise without exchanging money. We're not relying on the financial system. So I cut your hair, you cut my grass, or whatever. As I said, these ideas and more have been around for a long, long time. What seems to have happened is that they've been kept in a kind of alternative, hippie, whatever bubble part of society. And now we all need to see a good idea and use it for ourselves. These are practical tools. We need to make them work for us here and now. You, isn't it?
I think so, yeah, thank you, mate. Alright, so what have we done so far? What have Cooperation Hull done? We've been here about a year, and we've held more than 10 people's assemblies, which is great. A lot of big organisations will take a year and 100,000 quid to run an assembly. But we've run more than 10, going postcode by postcode, inviting people to their local neighbourhood assembly. In HU3, 70 people turned up, HU4, 20 people, HU5, 60 people. So quite a mix, and we ask something different every time. Stuff like, what are the biggest problems in our society and how can we ourselves address them? And they're not just talking shops, it's us practicing the art of democracy. So that when we come to tackle the really big problems, the practical issues, we know how to listen and how to work together. So they're just getting started. We need them to be happening everywhere, all over the city, all over the country. We need you and the people that you know to be running them, to feel comfortable running them. Whether that's in your workplaces, in your communities, just on your street, and we can help you do that. And then I want to touch on what those assemblies have achieved. So last year in November, we ran 2 assemblies here in HU3, just down the road, with the housing charity Gyroscope, who do amazing work. I'll come back to them. But their tenants, volunteers and staff all came to those assemblies. And out of that process came Waffle, which is our community food event, runs every Tuesday night. People come along, get a great meal, eat it all together next to a live radio show being broadcast, and everyone pays whatever they want. You know, they can pay 50p or they can pay a tenner. And the best part is the food is really good. So that's an example of responding as a neighbourhood, as a local area, through an assembly, and we're responding to the problems of lack of community, lack of spaces to spend time together in. Like Gully said, they're getting less and less, and there's also a lack of affordable good food, and the fact that millions of tonnes of food goes to waste every year in this country, and you know, we're not to blame for that. Most of that isn't coming off our plates. It's coming from supermarkets and how inefficient that system is. So all of that to say that Waffle is making things practically better for us here and now. So yeah, do come and have dinner with us one Tuesday. Most of you already have. And at Waffle, a couple of weeks ago, we ran Soup Night, where we gave away a grand to local community projects. So these are just normal local people who had an idea, they wanted to make their community a better place, and they needed some money to do it. So we gave some money to a men's fitness group who have a focus on mental health. We gave some money to a project who are giving free sanitary products to pubs, restaurants, community centres, places where people need them. And we gave some money to a food community up in Bransholm that is using some of that supermarket surplus and other locally grown food and selling it for a reasonable price. So yeah, that was amazing, and that's the sort of thing that can happen when people come together again and again every week and talk about what they want to see happening in their local area. And then a bit broader, breaking out of HU3, we've been building relationships with existing organisations across the city, progressive networks, and there's so much amazing stuff already happening. Like Gully mentioned, everyone on this poster and many, many more. And these are really the basis of the solidarity economy. It's time banks, urban farms, cooperatives. So yeah, do look these people up, find out what's happening near you, and get involved. Because not only are they the basis of the solidarity economy, but you are as well. So hopefully these organisations will pledge their expertise and their time and resources to making the outcomes of the assemblies a reality. So we're not just talking in the assemblies, and we're not making a decision and then going to the local council and saying, please can you do this for us? We've got resources for ourselves so we can implement the changes. And we're also working with local businesses to do that. Cafes, hairdressers, bars, we're approaching them and saying, will you be part of this new network across Hull? And people are saying yes, you know, people are really excited to be part of a positive change. And they're really important because they're community hubs, you know, they know the people on their street. That is again one of the places where people go and know each other and talk to each other. So all of that, the local neighbourhood assemblies, the work that people are doing here in their communities, the networks of businesses we're building across the city, is all building up to the first citywide Hull People's Assembly. So that's going to be about 200 people coming together and tackling a real practical issue. It could be the housing crisis or the cost of living crisis for ourselves, deciding what we're going to do with all those resources and creating a real alternative to the broken two-party political system. Yes, so that's what we're doing, what we have done and where we're hoping to go. And then if we keep doing that for a couple of years, I want us to imagine Hull in a few years' time. So people's assemblies are happening all across the city. They're places where anyone can attend, come and share food and discuss with their neighbours and make real change happen in their neighbourhoods for themselves. Maybe every ward or every postcode has a regular assembly, self-organised and run by the people who live there. And maybe there's one called to build trust and community, or maybe it's called to discuss a particular topic. Green space being bought up by property developers, for example. Or maybe there's been flooding and we need to organise an emergency response. Or maybe you could decide to create a community land trust and work on buying empty shops, green spaces, unused buildings, and then democratically deciding how to use them with everyone in your area. So there's no more big chains moving in, pushing up the prices and moving out local businesses. There's no more big empty buildings while people are freezing on the streets. That's what we could do with people's assemblies. And to move away from the failing economy that isn't working for any of us, cooperatives need to organise and make decisions together, so there needs to be connections between them. Maybe they work together to form a local supply chain, or maybe they exchange skills, ideas, or labour to be more effective. Whatever they're doing, they're connected, and they're democratic, and they're local, and they form the basis for the solidarity economy. So, in our imaginations, the year is 2027, and the Hull Citywide Assembly is big. 200 people meet every month, say, and actively engage in conversations on loads of different topics about the city, and about our lives more generally, stuff that's usually left to the council or to the government. We're deciding for ourselves. There's a task force, that's a group of people who come from the Assembly and they're in charge of putting into practice what the Assembly decides. And a block of organisations and small businesses that resource these decisions. And in all of that picture, the decision making, the implementation, the people working together, you might wonder what has happened to the council. we should be realistic. They've got money, they've got resources, and most people who get involved in local politics do so for the right reasons. So we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but ultimately, people's assemblies are the truly democratic space where power needs to lie, not the council. So maybe we will elect people, maybe we'll stand candidates for election, but even if they do get elected, their only policy is to implement the decisions from the assemblies. So they're not responding to the party line or their own interests, they're listening to the people, like happened in Barcelona. Okay. So the reason I think that is so important, the reason I think us making the decisions is so important is because only we have our best interests at heart. If all of us had an assembly with ordinary local people, teachers, posties, shopkeepers, parents and children, local people with the time to decide, hearing from a range of experts, do you think they would decide to carry on lining the pockets of gas companies, or maybe would we decide to insulate our homes so our energy bills are lower? What if decisions around the NHS were made by people who work there, or decisions around transport were made by people who use and work in public transport? And I'm not talking about bullshit consultations where we have a say and then they do whatever they want. I'm talking about real, genuine democracy, us making the decisions, and then us rolling up our sleeves and getting stuff done. None of that is going to be easy or perfect or without struggle, and I don't have all the answers for you, neither does Cooperation Hub. But this is a vision that we believe in, that we can unite around, and it's what we're working towards in Cooperation Hub.
Thank you. So the only thing left to say is what I said at the beginning, that this won't work without you. And obviously it won't work without quite a few more people who are not in this room right now. So before you leave, let's have a discussion about what you feel like your place in this movement could be. It doesn't matter how much time you have, what experience you have, what skills, what interests. Everybody has a place in this movement. That's how it has to be, otherwise it won't work. So if you're watching this on the internet, we want your phone number and we'll give you a call and follow up with you and have that same conversation. And you don't have to agree with everything you've heard today. Maybe we've made that point too much, but the point is not to agree. The point is to work together. Yep. So we'll have a discussion now, but the last thing I want to say is about how this could scale. So we started in Hull because we believe this is fertile ground to make something happen. But our vision, obviously, if we're going to change the world, has to go beyond Hull. So imagine that this happened in 5, 10, 50, 100 cities all over the country. Imagine that the Hull People's Assembly was connected up and making decisions with the Leeds People's Assembly, the Manchester People's Assembly and beyond. Coordinating regionally, nationally, maybe even internationally. There are already these groups popping up. We have them contact us all the time. Cooperation Sheffield, Cooperation Todmorden maybe, groups who are inspired by what we're doing and we're inspired by what Cooperation Jackson and other groups are doing and who want to coordinate. So this is happening. And all of what you've heard today may have sounded wildly ambitious, maybe, I don't know, out of touch with reality, maybe utopian, naive, crazy, I don't know. All I'll say to that is that it's 2024 and the brightest minds of our generation are telling us in no uncertain terms that we absolutely have to change everything about the way we organise our society if humanity is going to survive. So it is up to us to be ambitious, to be utopian and maybe even a little bit crazy, and we hope you'll join us. Thank you for your attention and your time.